Prologue. On the quiet outskirts of Port Junction, a small town nestled between rolling hills and the distant northern mountains, the railway line wound like a forgotten ribbon through the countryside. Trains passed infrequently, and the townsfolk hardly gave them any notice. With no station or bustling platforms, Port Junction wasn't a place where trains stopped. Its people were far more focused on their gardens, farms and small shops than on the occasional rumble along the tracks. But hidden just beyond the town's edge, tucked beneath a bridge and half claimed by nature, stood something curious and often overlooked. A signal box. Perched below the road bridge, the little building nestled into the hillside, its paint chipped, its windows clouded with dust. From the road above, it was barely visible, concealed by thick trees and tangled bushes that had grown wild over the years. Only those who knew precisely where to look would even notice it. The bridge spanned a deep cutting where the railway ran far below, disappearing into the distance in both directions, carving its way through fields and forests. A rusty, creaking gate stood nearby, its crooked frame surrounded by tall grasses and wild bushes. Beyond the gate, a narrow path snaked down the hillside, barely visible beneath the overgrown weeds and roots that tangled across it. Following the path to the bottom led to the railway tracks, and just a short walk along the line, the old signal box itself. This signal box had stood for as long as anyone could remember, its windows facing the tracks like the unblinking eyes of a solitary sentinel. To the west, the tracks vanished among dense trees. To the east, they curved gracefully out of sight, hugging the hills. From its small veranda, the view was striking, offering a sweeping vantage point that stretched along the line in both directions. And yet, for all its watchful presence, very few trains came. Most days, the signal box sat quietly, its only companions the soft rustling of grass and the distant calls of birds. The people of Port Junction rarely spoke of the signal box. Only the bravest children dared each other to creep past the rusty gate and explore the overgrown path. But even they never ventured far, always turning back before reaching the bottom. The signal box seemed to hold secrets no one was quite ready to uncover. At sunset, the signal box bathed in golden light, casting long shadows across the hills. It seemed to wait, as it always did, quietly watching the railway and listening for the distant sound of an approaching train. Though to most it looked like any other signal box, it had seen things over the years and stood ready to see more. Inside, the signal box was a world of its own, filled with brightly painted levers that directed the fate of the passing trains. These levers controlled the signals along the line, guiding trains eastward to the port, a major hub, or westward towards sidings and distant stations, some bustling with life, others left to ruin. The railway had been operating for nearly 70 years, and though the world around it had changed, the signal box remained steadfast, a piece of history in its own right. Beyond its role in directing trains, the signal box was also a second home for its signalman. On late shifts, he would often stay rather than return to his small house in town. He had arranged a cosy sitting area with 2 couches that could be pulled out into beds and stocked a corner kitchen with simple supplies. A small wood-burning stove crackled warmly during the cold months, and a kettle sat ready to boil, filling the air with the comforting scent of tea. A large wooden telephone hung on the wall, its antiquated design fitting the signal box's vintage character. This direct line to control, the Central Railway office, was rarely used, but demanded his immediate attention when it did ring. With a quick tug on a lever and an eye on the signals, the signalman kept the line running smoothly. The signal box, with its weathered walls and peeling paint, might have seemed unremarkable to most. But within its walls were countless stories. Nights spent watching the stars through the windows, long hours waiting for the few trains that passed, and the faint smell of wood smoke from the little stove. As the sun set each evening, the signalman dreamed of adventures far beyond Port Junction. Adventures that seemed closer each time a train passed by on its way to distant places. And though the signal box was unassuming, something was beginning to stir in the quiet. A subtle anticipation, as if the railway line and the signal box itself sensed change approaching.